Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartmann. Now, if you've ever felt frustrated about the lack of headlines that we get in our industry, whether it's construction in general or building material supply specifically, well, good news for you. We have some drama in our industry. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Brad Jacobs or QXO, don't worry. This episode will do a little bit of rewind, bring you up to the present, and then make some guesses or prognostications that will surely prove to be inaccurate in the future. And if you're unfamiliar with Brad Jacobs, two things. He has been very successful and has created 8 multi-billion-dollar businesses. He was in oil brokerage, and then he got into equipment rentals. Then he transitioned into logistics and LTL, less than truckload shipping. And at every step of the way, he's been successful. And now he recently started QXO. He's been talking about that. And when I say talking about that, I have 4 fingers in the air that are doing air quotes because he's been doing a lot of talking. And that may or may not help him at this juncture, but give me a second. We'll get there in a minute. So he's been very successful. That's one. Number 2, this guy is a salesman above all else. Anything else that this guy is, he's a salesman. He wants to dream big. He wants to make billions of dollars. He wrote a book that described his playbook, exactly how to do it. And he's going to do that with other people's money. Now, that's neither good nor bad. I believe he has and his family have at least $1 billion of skin in the game in QXO. But largely, he raises billions of dollars from other people and says, listen, our number one goal, and he says this over and over and over again. He says it before he talks about customers. He says it before he talks about employees. It's all about shareholder return. Why? Well, if he's going to dream big, he needs lots of money. Therefore, he needs lots of people, whether they're in the United States or they're Jared Kushner and his family business or the Saudi Arabians. He needs dry powder. He needs money to do all these acquisitions. And to do that, he needs to execute an unbelievable marketing playbook that has him nonstop in the news, as he's been doing for the last 2 years, including now. However, this might create some perverse incentives for him to act in a way that might not be beneficial to QXO, but that remains to be seen. So I'll start with this. My thesis is QXO is not interested in LBM dealers. I think there's way too many parts. I think there's way too many pieces. I think there's way too many places. Each lumberyard is kind of different. They all have their little unique challenges and opportunities and footprints. And probably most importantly, they require a lot of people. And I don't think he wants to get his hands dirty in all of that. I believe whatever he buys and wherever that technology is going to go, I think he wants a lot of hard concrete underneath every square inch of the place. And I think he wants a solid roof over the top that will allow him to deploy technology in a more consistent way. So in preparing this, I went and pulled Craig Webb's The Construction Supply 150 from 2023. And his list has a lot of the kind of non-standard LBM dealers in it, but I think it's instructive. So number 1, you have Home Depot, obviously not an option. Number 2, Lowe's. They have a $148 billion market cap right now. Not an option, but they'll come up later. Number 3, we have Builders First Source. Well, I don't think he wants any part of that. Number 4 is ABC Supply. I think that would be very interesting. I don't think they have any interest in selling. They're private. I think they like the way things are going. Number 5, you have Ferguson, which has a $36 billion market cap right now, seemingly too big. You got 6, Menards, also private. Number 7 and 8 are USLBM and 84 Lumber. Number 9 was SRS, obviously recently acquired by Home Depot. Number 10, you got Beacon. Then at 11, you have Harbor Freight, which is private. You have GMS, which could be an option. It's $3 billion. They could do that. However, it's just drywall, which probably isn't as exciting or expandable as Jacobs may be interested in as he's thinking about that $50 billion. You got Floor and Decor, probably way too much retail there. Number 14 is SiteOne Landscape, which is $6.7 billion, but obviously that is very much landscaping focused. Then you get into Kodiak, you have UFP, you have Carter Jones. 18, you have Foundation Building Materials. Could be interesting. It's private. You have Top Build, based out of Daytona. That could be interesting. 20 is McCoy's. That's a no. 21 is Lansing, which is private. Northern Tool and Equipment is 22. That's private. Then you're dropping all the way down to 32. If you're skipping all the dealers, it's Shelter Products. That's also private. So if you're just looking at this Construction Supply 150 list, you're kind of scratching your head thinking we don't have a whole lot of opportunities. So then it leads you to look at some other folks, and it might be Wolseley or Wesco or Blue Links or Cameron Ashley. I don't think they want to go after the Grangers and the MSC Industrial Supply. It seems like a different sort of business. Maybe a Wind Supply or a Gray Bar. Those could be options potentially. Or you've got the publicly traded companies that you could take a chunk or a large or small segment, and you're thinking about LP or Weyerhaeuser or Boise Cascade. So in doing this research, you see pretty quickly there's not hundreds and hundreds of opportunities. There's a few dozen. So then the question would be, if Brad Jacobs is going to do this M&A playbook, what might that look like? And lucky for us, he wrote a book on it. It's called How to Make a Few $Billion, and chapter 3 is titled How to Do Lots of High Quality M&A Without Imploding. So I went back and reviewed this, and I think this is instructive as we're thinking about what he wrote, how much he believes in this, and to what degree he is following this actual playbook. And as we consider the behavior and communication towards our friends at Beacon, we can look on page 91. He starts with respect the seller. A psychologist in my extended family once told me there are 2 times when an otherwise perfectly sane individual is vulnerable to becoming temporarily insane. One is when their spouse tells them they want a divorce, and the other is when their employer tells them they are fired. I would add a third category, which is when people are selling their companies. Sellers are usually under a lot of stress and not at their best. He writes, I learned that the last thing I want to do is anger a seller to the point where it permanently kills the deal. I can picture some of those early sellers saying, damn it, I'll sell my business to anyone except Brad. He writes, do everything you can to develop mutually respectful relationships with sellers. My wife has a saying she used a lot when our kids were growing up. Always be patient, pleasant, and polite. I think of her 3 Ps frequently when I'm dealing with sellers. Inevitably, they lead to better dialogue, and dialogue leads to trust. He goes on, I find that the more I communicate with the seller in a genuine manner, the more I can ease the tension. For example, if I admire what they've done with the business, I'll tell them that. If I'm eager to buy it and not just on the fence, I'll tell them that too. It also helps to explain how the negotiation and post-sale processes will work. These statements cannot be false flattery. If I can't say something authentic to the seller, I'll stay quiet. And the last paragraph here was another tenet of my M&A philosophy, and one that I've impressed on my teams, is the importance of removing every trace of vanity from the process. I've never done an acquisition, even a small one, merely to boost my company's image or get coverage in the financial press. Now, as I was rereading that book, and by the way, my friend and LBM leader John Vaughn on episode 390 of this podcast reviewed and went back and forth on the book. So if you're interested in finding that, it's from March of 2024, episode 390. But as I was rereading that, I was imagining that Brad Jacobs at every step of the way could say, no, I am respecting, well, maybe not the seller here, because I'm doing my best to make sure that everyone, most importantly, the shareholders of Beacon, are looking at their leadership and questioning if they're doing everything they can, because he wants to be their new leader. And he might say, yes, I'm not respecting the seller, but I'm respecting the shareholder. And there's a distinction there. But I find it interesting because I do believe here there is an element of urgency that may or may not, who knows, may have Brad violating some of these things that he learned and talked about in his book. And there seems to be a different playbook. We have two instances now, but they're both coming over the last several months of something that is completely different than what we are seeing in the book. And this first example came in September 16th of 2024, when Rexel, the French electrical supplies distributor, refused an offer of up to $9.6 billion from Brad Jacobs and QXO. So what happened was, apparently after some communication back and forth in private, Brad Jacobs issues a public letter and essentially runs down all the ways that Rexel is underperforming. Now, Rexel is publicly traded on the Paris Exchange, and it read like a bunch of mudslinging, which is basically these guys aren't doing the shareholders here any services, and if QXO was running the place, they can make a lot more money. Well, the quote in the Wall Street Journal was, Rexel's board of directors has reviewed the proposal in detail and has unanimously decided not to pursue it, considering that it significantly undervalues the company and does not reflect its value creation potential through its Power Up 25 strategic plan. And what Jacobs was saying, whatever the Power Up 25 strategic plan is, it's not working, and you guys are underperforming against your peers, and that is why you should accept this offer and let us show you what growth really looks like. Rexel says no thanks, and then guess what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. It just went away, and I was reading it, and I'm following it, and I'm looking for Google updates. Nothing happens, and then it just disappears. So that was the opening salvo from QXO. That was officially their first public demonstration of their ambition to become a $50 billion company. They've got $5 billion in the bank. They're going to get financing or whatever, wherever the money comes from. They got more of it. They offered essentially $9.6 billion to Rexel, and Rexel says no. And seemingly the next week, everybody just carries on, acting like nothing happened. But then 2 months later, almost to the day, there is this headline: building products distributor QXO makes bid for Beacon Roofing.
Next up in trending tickers, we've got QXO as well as Beacon Roofing. Now, the building products distributor making an offer to acquire Beacon Roofing Supply. That's according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. Beacon's got a market cap of around $6.7 billion. It's the largest publicly traded distributor of roofing materials and other complementary building products in the U.S. and Canada. According to that same report, a deal could be agreed to before the end of the year. Beacon Roofing shares, by the way, have been flying on that report. I did reach out to QXO and they declined to comment on this report, but this is what QXO was built for by Brad Jacobs, who formerly was in the logistics and trucking business. He then looked at, okay, what's my next thing going to be? What's the next thing that deserves sort of roll-ups? And he decided it was this sort of building product distributors.
Yeah, the Journal has this one. The exact terms of the offer, it doesn't look like they could determine that at this point. Brad Jacobs, well-known guy, has friends in high places, by the way. Trump's son-in-law, of course, Jared Kushner, sits on the board there. Yes. Always helpful, I would imagine.
It probably doesn't hurt. No. Exactly.
I saw this and I'm wondering, oh my gosh, now what's going to happen? And as we headed into Thanksgiving and in early December, the answer was very Rexel-like, nothing. Nobody said anything. So once again, I'm trying to figure out what exactly is happening with this QXO strategy until January 15th, and then several things become clearer. There's another public letter, and QXO proposes to acquire Beacon Roofing for $124.25 per share, more or less an $11 billion acquisition. And then QXO sent the following letter to Beacon's chairman today regarding the proposal. Dear Stuart, I am writing to reiterate our surprise at your continued refusal to substantively engage with us on our offer to acquire Beacon for $124.25 per share in cash, submitted to the company in a letter on November 11th, 2024. Now, here is what I find interesting. Is that exactly 1 week from November 11th, 2024 was November 18th, as you know. That was the pump fake. The Wall Street Journal releasing this news that QXO had made an offer to Beacon and that they could close quickly, but there was nothing. Nothing else happened. So pure speculation on my part, but my guess is after months and months of QXO trying to get the attention of Beacon, who says, no thanks, we're good, not interested, Brad, you and your buddies, we're just fine here. QXO formally submits this letter and says, listen, if you do not engage with us at all within 1 week, we are going to go to the press with this. And it turns out that's exactly what they did. But following that, nothing happened. My guess is with the holidays approaching, they said, let's not be annoying for everybody, including ourselves. Let's just wait until we get to maybe mid-January, and then we'll blow this whole thing up. So the letter goes on to say they had their virtual meeting with the CEO, Julian Francis, in July of 24. Nothing really happens. It sounds like Beacon was just blowing them off. The letter continues, and under segment 4, it says, Beacon has failed to optimize value for shareholders. And their general argument is that Beacon, as an organization, has underperformed against its peers. They could be doing better, and that their balance sheet lacks the capacity to pursue transformational M&A. What does that mean? Nobody knows. My guess is the balance sheet lacks billions and billions of dollars of dry powder from Brad Jacobs' friends that can help them ultimately build a $50 billion business. Stewart comes back in this letter and says Beacon has a proven track record of delivering superior results and shareholder value, having generated shareholder returns under our current management team of more than 200% during the past 5 years. So as I dug into Beacon's financials, I downloaded their last 10Q, and they have been busy. They had 10 acquisitions that added 40 locations, but they did in part 2, they do have a graph that compares Beacon roofing supply against the NASDAQ index and an S&P 1500 trading companies and distribution index. And you'll see 4 of the last 6 years, they do underperform both the NASDAQ and the S&P 1500, barely climb into second place in 2022, and then do reasonably well in 2023. So if you are looking for data that Beacon has supplied that supports what Jacobs is saying, well, you can look in part 2 of their latest 10Q. So now what? Well, I want to thank Brian Gottlieb of Roofing Supply Pro. He found this little nugget in here, and he notes in his article that language at the end of QXO's letter, tucked within the requisite boilerplate language that often accompanies financial disclosures, is the proverbial shot across the bow for Beacon. It says QXO and the other participants intend to file a preliminary proxy statement and accompanying white universal proxy card with the SEC, which have to be filed by February 14th of 2025, which means that there is going to be a proxy fight, which is essentially we make arguments to the shareholders themselves, especially to the companies and funds that own the majority of their shares. And hopefully we throw out the Beacon folks and let QXO take over and the shareholders make that decision. Now, to point out the obvious, QXO has never done this before. They've never run a roofing distributions company. So what do we think about that? Well, we can look at Home Depot recently acquiring SRS and see, well, the market kind of like that, I guess, when Home Depot acquired SRS. Remains to be seen if, customers actually do. But that's one example. But that also leads to this question of, is Beacon up for sale? And if it is, I don't know, would Lowe's be interested? Lowe's trying to counteract. This would be an interesting counter acquisition. Home Depot, the big gets bigger, they take SRS. All right. Lowe's, who's smaller, they take Beacon. I don't know. That could be interesting. Or what if Ferguson says, actually, we want to expand. They're already ahead of the game in a lot of technology. Maybe they expand. I doubt a Fastenal would be interested in Beacon roofing, but that could be interesting. I doubt it. Or maybe Amazon. Maybe Amazon is looking at this $800 billion industry the same way Jacobs is. And of course, you can buy Jacobs' book on Amazon. Maybe they read it. Maybe they said, this guy's onto something. Can you imagine what Amazon could do, bringing some of their technology and infusing our construction industry with a little bit of Amazon magic? Although you could never, ever, ever talk to a human there. That would be interesting. I think they might have to change that. But maybe Amazon just flips up a cushion or two on the couch, finds enough change to buy Beacon and Fastenal and Lowe's and QXO. I don't know. Lots of opportunities there. So now what? Now we see if QXO is really going to begin this proxy battle, which is a little bit of drama in and of itself, to see if they do that. And if they do, there's going to be a lot more drama to come. It can get really dirty and ugly. And here is where I wonder if the 2 years of the marketing and the constant publicity and the constant talking about what he will do, now that it's here, is this the best move? Because if you look at one of the last really big billion-dollar acquisitions that XPO did, which was Jacobs' logistics company, it was for Conway. However, it was not acrimonious. They made an offer. It sounded good. They went through. The integration was good. And everybody ended up really happy in the end, as far as I know. This is very different. And I was struggling to really research instances where a Brad Jacobs company went after and had to play dirty and had to do a proxy fight. And then once they've gone through all that drama and consternation for all the employees and the customers, they come out and say, good news. We're running the place now. Let's all be friends and let's get together and let's infuse this place with a bunch of AI and a bunch of other things that you've never worked with before. I don't know. Is that really what he's going to do? It's going to be interesting, but it could very well be someone who made these promises about a $50 billion industry and shaping it all and executed a modern marketing playbook to the T is now feeling the weight to make this work no matter what. And who knows? This is where a lot of smart people potentially could make mistakes. So look for that Valentine's Day deadline first, and then we'll see what happens afterwards. What I do know is that a lot of other people who are leading companies that are similar to Beacon in some nature are certainly already thinking about changing what they do, investing in more technology. And this is where, regardless of what happens with QXO and Beacon, I do believe what's going to happen is this will be an instance of competition making entire industries better. You have a disruptor come in and he's going to throw his weight around. He's got money and they're going to infuse it with technology and add AI and all these other elements that largely are absent at the moment. Well, people, whether or not they think they're going to be targeted by QXO or approached by QXO if they're private, I think they're going to already understand that change is needed and that will accelerate. So regardless of what happens, I think this is a good thing for the industry, if not some version of really annoying or catastrophic or just a waste of time for the leaders and employees and the customers, the contractors of Beacon. So thanks for listening. Hopefully this helps. Please share with me what you think. I'm trying to track my own predictions for the future to see if the research I'm doing and understanding the market dynamics in our industry to see what plays out. And as always, thank you for listening. We will close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.